Our relationship style and what we understand about brain organization and personality is our relationship style comes from our personality. And again, that personality is laid down for us at the time of birth. Our brain is hardwired at that point in time, and all of our relationship emerges from that personality organization or orientation. Now, each one of our relationship styles, based on our personality, has very specific satisfiers and dissatisfiers. These are conditions, activities, undertakings that happen in our environment that are either going to cause us to feel satisfied in our relationships, or it's going to contribute to that sense of dissatisfaction in our relationships. And what we do as human beings is we strive to get those predominant needs that I was talking about met through communication, through how we resolve conflict, romance, and intimacy. And these are unconscious patterns of behavior, right? So we go about these things without consciously thinking about it. It's automatic. It's the why we behave the way we do, but we use these patterns of behavior in order to get the needs met based on our relationship style. And they're predictable. These are predictable patterns of behavior. And when we use them in a way to get that need met that's unconscious and self-protective, then it actually contributes to the dysfunction that can exist in relationships. And again, at work or at home, have to remember we're in relationships in a variety of different places, okay? So when we rely on those predictable self-protective behaviors that are rooted in our personality and our relationship style to get our needs met because our needs are not getting met in those relationships, then it actively contributes to the dysfunction that's going on. So let's talk about the visionary style. So the visionary style is based on the striving styles personality system, connecting it up to the Myers-Briggs, INTJ, and INFJ. It is all about the right rational brain, and that is where the envisioning function resides in our brain. The envisioning function, again, is all about the ability to see, right? See with the mind's eye. It's future focused, it's intuitive in its orientation, it's big picture element. It's about putting all the pieces together. It's about reading between the lines and drawing out those insights, and it's all about achieving potential. The visionary style has the predominant need to be perceptive. Okay, so that is about seeing things. It's about really being able to see it, but not see it in that I can touch it, I can feel it experiential way, but about seeing it in the mind's eye and seeing it in a way that I can really understand it, and that I can work with it, right? And I can work with that level of understanding. So it is not about knowledge, which we talked about with the intellectual, the INTP and the ISTP, but really about that ability to be perceptive. Now, here's what you need to know about the relationship style, or the style generally about this particular personality, visionary, INTJ, INFJ. They believe in human potential, full stop. So their focus is all about encouraging and inspiring the development of potential in themselves and others. My business partner, Anne, this is her predominant style, is the visionary. So it's all about going after and seeing that, knowing it, gaining those insights into it, right? They are inspired and they are incredibly intuitive, this particular style. And they really do seek to understand that deeper workings of their friends, of their family, and with a focus on trying to help their friends and family improve their quality of life. They give them counsel, and they like nothing more than when these people come to them for counsel. Although it can be really challenging for this style when they encounter the realities of some of these folks who really don't want to change. They just want to talk about what's going on in their world, right? They spend a lot of time studying, reading, and gathering information. And again, not just to gather the information, but so that they can gain those insights. And then they can use those insights and apply those insights in their work and in their relationships. And their insights can sometimes border almost on feeling a bit psychic, or really be blindsiding to someone who's not yet ready to accept that information about themselves. They desire meaningful relationships. So this is very important. And they will appear more social than they actually are. And they like nothing better than to play with ideas and play with possibilities and be really out there in the future of what if we did this and what if we do that? Or I'd really like to see this happen. But they, it's when we think about it from that perspective, and despite desiring meaningful relationships, they still need a lot of time on their own, okay? I know Anne, whenever we've all sort of piled up and been around her in her space, it's like nothing feels better than when everybody leaves. As much as she's enjoyed that time, is having that time and that space on her own to process, to consider, again, to be on their own is very important. They can appear aloof and emotionally distant, and they really invest a great deal of their energy up in their heads, okay? So there's always a ton that's going on up there. And they don't always share themselves. They are actually quite sensitive, right? Very sensitive. They get hurt easily, but you're not always aware of it because they don't necessarily show to others when they're struggling. Again, part of that sort of protection. We often refer to the visionary as the Wizard of Oz, right? So in behind the curtain, what they project is sort of the big, all-powerful and almighty Oz, but then what's in and behind the curtain is very much different, sort of that small, sort of frightened man as depicted in the movie. Okay? But it really is this, their insights are their power, that insight, that ability to kind of know without knowing why. And that can be sometimes really great in a relationship, especially in a work relationship, can also be really challenging. And one of my clients has one of a visionary on his team, and he's always saying it's tough because the way they articulate stuff, we don't necessarily want to hear it, but they are almost always right. And so we know we have to listen to it, because if we don't listen, it's to our own detriment, okay? Now, there are a couple of things for this style that are real need dissatisfiers. And again, need dissatisfiers are those types of interactions, conversations, and activities that we have with others that really get in the way of our predominant need being met. And so it creates dissatisfaction. It frustrates our needs, pushes us into our self-protective system, and then we trigger those predictable patterns of self-protective behaviors that can really get in the way of our relationships, our effectiveness, and ultimately our success. If these need dissatisfiers are present, the other thing to be aware of is it causes us to be easily irritated, depressed, angered, frustrated, right? And so we're always sort of tipping over onto that. We'll find fault in others. We'll pick fights. We'll engage in non-productive, or again, those self-protective behaviors. And our energies get directed to get our needs met in ways that are not always productive, right? Because we have to go after it, but it might not be satisfying and it might not be effective in terms of our relationship. As I said earlier, really easy for us to tip over into that place of contributing to dysfunction in the relationships. So when we look at the visionary style, there's three things, okay? So first and foremost, when they are in this situation where they have to share their feelings or they have to reveal too much personal information, and that can cause them to shut down, that can cause them to withdraw, or that can cause them to lash out or to act out or to pick a fight because they don't want to go there, right? The other thing is being in a space where there's too much superficial conversation and trivia. So deep, meaningful relationships are really important to this style, right? And so if everything is around the superficial and they can't go deeper, they can't go below that, they can't find that way in order to forge that relationship, that can really cause them to tune out. And last but not least, and I've lived this one, as my son is this style, I've lived this one over and over again, that inability to see the big picture, that inability to see what is going to happen, how things are going to come together, the way it is all going to work. Again, their need is to be perceptive and they can't perceive what is happening in the future. That can be really problematic. Now, they see with their mind's eye, so they need enough information to pull that picture together in their heads, but they will, when they can't perceive the way they need to perceive, when they can't see the big picture, when the pieces of the puzzle are not fitting up together, they will go after people with their questions, with their rapid fire questions, and they can do it with an absolute lack of sensitivity. The way it used to show up in my son when he was younger, it always triggered a temper tantrum. Always triggered a temper tantrum. And so it's really interesting to watch, because as adults, in essence, we're triggering the adult version to temper tantrums when they are not seeing the big picture. And it could have been anything from not seeing when something that he was doing that was fun was coming to an end, right? If we just said it ends now, it would be an immediate temper tantrum. If we said, hey, this has to end in 5 minutes and we're going to count it down so you can see it and so you can know it, you can perceive what's happening, and you have that sense of what's going to happen next, see that understanding in your mind, then there was no temper tantrum. Easy transition. I remember one time very clearly where we were getting ready to go out to an amusement park. My nephew was in town, and we were going out to a fair in the city that we were living in at the time. And he was about, I don't know, 8, 9 years old maybe. And he got really upset. We didn't really know what for, and was hiding behind a plant in the house, refusing to leave to go to the fair. And of course, logically in my brain, I'm going, why would you not want to go to the fair? Well, what had happened was, in his mind, because we hadn't told him what it was going to be like, we didn't give him any information about what it was going to look like as we went to the fair, how the day was going to look, what was going to happen. And in the absence of that, he started to create his own story. And that story was, the worst possible scenario he could come up with in his mind. And because of his age, he couldn't articulate. He couldn't say, I need more information. I need to know what the plan is. I need to know how the day is going to go. I need to know what the experience is going to look like so that I can move towards that experience. And instead, as I talked about, after we went through that sort of, just get in the car, we're leaving, it's going to be fun, it's going to be great, and instead went after, it's like, what is actually going on in that head of yours? In his mind, what he had told himself, because we hadn't provided the information to meet his need to be perceptive about the experience, in his mind, we were going to do all kinds of boring grown-up stuff, and we weren't going to do all the fun stuff that he likes to do when he goes to the fair. So in his mind, that his perception was off, and he couldn't go after the information in a way that might change that. And that's how powerful it is, right? You see that absolute, like, there was nothing about his behavior in that moment that was in his best interest and got him out the door faster. In fact, we were almost at the point of threatening, saying, okay, fine, we're not going to go if you're going to behave like this. But in staying with it and trying to understand the why, right? Why is he behaving this way? There's got to be something that got triggered that we're not meeting as parents. So once we got that, we understood it. Every single time we were going to do something, he got the information. And it's like, do you have any other questions? Is there anything else you need to know? So as long as that need was being met, easily off he went. Anytime we would forget about it, that was when we would see that shift in his behavior, the self-protective action coming in, and the emotionality in that power struggle that would often emerge from it. Okay, that's how important meeting these needs are, right? And when the need dissatisfiers are present, how destructive or how much we can shift our behavior off in a way that actually contributes to dysfunction, or as I sometimes say to my daughter, cuts off our nose to spite our face, because we're thinking we're getting our need met, but it's actually working against us in that moment when we think about things longer term, okay? So what do they do when they're being self-protective? So how do we know I'm visionary? If we're in a relationship with an INTJ or an INFJ, how do we know that they're being self-protective? Well, there's a couple of things that we watch for from a behavioral perspective. Again, these are all predictable patterns of behavior that emerge when this particular style is working from their self-protective system. First and foremost, they keep themselves at a distance in their relationships. They really keep themselves detached, right? So they don't invest, they don't engage, they don't talk, they don't connect. There's nothing that will go on within it, okay? They will also avoid dealing with conflict. And there's a couple of ways that they will do it. They will accommodate, they will say fine, whatever, they will give in, and they just won't stay present to what it is that they want or need, their vision for it, just going along to get along, right? So they'll just shift out of that place. Or they can get into this position of being really self-critical and perfectionistic, right? Where they don't finish anything, they don't get anything done, they keep at it and they keep at it, right? Because it's not good enough and it's not good enough, right? So it's always, if you think about it with this intuitive function, right? They can see it in all of its glory in their mind, but the disconnect between how they see it and what they can produce might not be aligned. And that's where a lot of that self-criticism can come in, can make it really, really challenging, right? I know for my son, that was one of his biggest challenges going through school, is he could see it so clearly in his head, but he couldn't bring it out in reality. And I always use his hands because that was a big blocker for him, right? They don't always recognize when they're being self-protective. They don't always recognize their need for space and time alone. And so what they'll actually do is they'll pick fights. Right? Because if I pick a fight with you, you'll tell me to go away, or you'll go away, and therefore I'll have that space to myself. or they'll push others away, or they'll isolate themselves. They won't reach out. Sort of they'll really sort of hide out in that space in order to get that need met. They won't go into any place of sharing their thoughts or sharing their feelings. And I watched this with my son, not so much with me, but certainly in his relationship with his father, where he refused to disclose any personal information. So his dad never really knew very much about him. He didn't live with his father, he lived with me. But in those conversations that he had with his father and the time he spent with his father, he would do things with his father, but he would never actually share anything about his friends, his aspirations, his school, anything like that. That was always kept really tight. And that, again, indicative of self-protective behavior in that particular context, right? And they make up stories laced with paranoia and intrigue. Going back to that example I gave of my son with the whole fair, us going to the fair, he'd made up all these stories in his head. And it was paranoid. It was all like, that worst possible, catastrophizing in this space of the worst possible thing that could happen in a day that was supposed to be really fun and exciting. We did eventually get him out the door and go. Once we guaranteed that this is what we were going to do. We're going to do some really fun stuff, and then we'll do some grown-up stuff. Grown-up stuff is walking through the buildings at fairs, like the exhibitions and stuff. But he likes that too. It was just that thought that he wasn't going to get to go on the rides and he wasn't going to get to go play games, which were the two most important things to him, right? So we got much better, in the course of this, and really understanding this about styles is meeting that need for having that plan, having everybody aligned to the same plan, just made things much easier, and allowing him to contribute to that planning process was also really important, as we discovered as well. Okay, so tips. Here are the tips. Here, this kind of the final thing I'm going to leave you with. These are tips. You need to negotiate for these things, right? So if these things are not happening in your relationships with your spouse, with your coworkers, your kids, whatever context it is in, where your needs are not getting met, where you're feeling dissatisfied, it's taking these tips and figuring out how to negotiate for some of them, right? Or how to talk about them and talk about this is what you need, right? And the flip is, if you are in a relationship with a visionary, an INTJ, or an INFJ, these are some things that you can do that will really make and provide for a more productive relationship with that individual. As I said, if you look at the example with my son, it was about me shifting my behavior in really simple ways that actually eliminated the conflict, the emotionality, the temper tantrums, all of those sorts of things. As long as I stayed present and attuned to what he needed, we had a fantastic relationship as a mother and son, and it kept that conflict out of that relationship. Whereas if I hadn't known it, it would have been very easy for us to constantly be clashing. Okay, so some tips: allow them to ask lots of questions and do not personalize their questions. I see this happen all the time, right? When we've got people with this style, the INTJ and the INFJ, they go into question mode because sometimes they're asking questions behind questions, or they're asking questions because they're thinking something and they don't want to come out with it directly. But just let them ask their questions. They will keep asking questions until they can be perceptive, until they can see what they need to see and it all fits together, and just stay in it with them. Give them the information. It's not an attack. It's not a criticism. It's not because you've done something wrong. It's because it hasn't quite gelled in their mind and their need to be perceptive is being frustrated. And when you're asking them for details, don't take their frustration at giving out that kind of information personally. Right? I mean, like, sometimes you ask a question and it's like it's like a high level say, okay, well, when, can you give me more details? And I'll even say that, with my son, with some of my clients, when they go into that place, it's like, okay, I need more information. You need to give me more details behind that. That's not enough for me. And they have to shift. And I know this because, as a performer, as an ENTP, we're having to go into a different part of our brain that is less developed for us. It's not our predominant. So it's literally like, I always feel it's like we're swinging around. And so it's a little bit harder. It's awkward, right? And so don't take their frustration and giving those details personally, because again, it's not about you. It's about them. It's about their brain, how their brain is wired, what comes easily, what comes challenging for them. The other thing is to refrain from criticizing their lack of attention to detail or their mundane mistakes that they will make, right? Or they're misplacing things, or they're locking keys in the car, or they're, sort of, you get the idea here, right? They're often dyslexic, but again, because they're always up in their heads, they're often disconnected from some of those physical experiences, and therefore the attention to detail can go on it. Don't shy away when they're being argumentative, okay? They're trying to get an issue out in the open when they've gone into that place. Stay with it. Be curious. Understand where they're coming from. Try and find out what's really going on. We'll say things like, what are you afraid of? And, what's behind that? Or what do you see happening? Or, sort of what is it that you're seeing in here? Help me understand that so we can actually problem solve the issue. And last but not least, allow them to help you to come up with solutions. They need to be valued. They need to be heard. They need their insights to be valued and appreciated. And when they are not asked for that insight, when they're not given the opportunity, that's really frustrating for them. If you're always imposing things on them, it doesn't give them that opportunity, and you miss out on the incredibly valuable insights that this style can offer you.